Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound. 10. The Gothic Wave. To preserve under an always growing wealth of detail the great shapes of cultural change, as in a chart of evolution, we have seen the Dark Age fortress of pre-Romanesque, Corvée, with the solemn tread of later plain song, about 900, to Otillo of St. Gall. Lift itself over Europe to the varieties of Romanesque, and in music to the first horizon of organum, the close of Mira Legge, early 12th century, with Vézelay. In one of these Romanesque branches surrounding Paris occurs the dynamic mutation of Gothic, Sens, mid-12th century, contemporary with Suger's Saint-Denis, and in music the driving force and mystical tenderness of Léonin. From that 1160 infolding, a complex of forms springs to 13th century rayonnance. We choose from many the delight of Coutances, and with it a mid-century motet, Salve Virgo Virginum. From the Ile-de-France, the Gothic wave spreads over Europe. A total transformation since Christianity went down into the catacombs of troubled late Rome, putting off temporality with all assertions of pagan reason and skill, seeking the solemn birth in the cave. As Augustine said of the old philosopher Victorinus, he blushed not to become the child of thy Christ, and an infant at thy font, submitting his neck to the yoke of humility, and subduing his forehead to the ignominy of the cross. Whereas Gothic from the ascetic grave wakes to the life of the world, beside anything earlier, even of the 12th century, what shimmers over Reims is a smile where the loves of heaven and earth are marvelously mingled. The turning point had been in Paris, but since the 1225 Madonna from the northwest portal of Notre Dame was spoiled in the Revolution, we turn to her mid-century successor from the doorway of the North Transept. These Marys, with those of Reims, or La Vierge Dorée of Amiens, gave fresh embodiment to the womanly as a spring garden of grace. At about the same time, 1230, Guillaume de Lorry crosses a like frontier from the 12th century distance of Chrétien into the dream vitality of the Romance of the Rose, such personality and sparkle as engendered everywhere and through 2 centuries imitations and rehandlings of that rich and fragile joy. En celui temps déliteus, que tout rien d'amour s'effroie, songez une nuit que j'estoie. In the delicious time of spring, when love enkindles everything, I dreamed I waked, and as it seemed, it was May morning in my dream. The dream of waking to foliage, birdsong, the clear river flowing from the hills, to be echoed from Dante and Boccaccio to Machaut and to Chaucer, as the Notre Dame Lady of the Pillar is followed by a whole school of loving, hip-shot virgins, softening by the end of the 14th century to those the Germans called Schöne, or in England to the Wilton diptych Mary, in a bower of angel wings, among blossoms too. For the painted landscape picks it up, as if the angel smile had renewed on earth the paradise garden, this 1400 Rhenish one, the serpent keeled up on the ground, lower right, such a brightness as Chaucer would describe in his Parliament of Fools. A garden saw ye full of blosmy boughs, upon a river in a green mead, there as sweetness evermore renew is, with floure sweet, a blue, a yellow and red, and cold a well extremis, nothing dead, that swimmen full of smale fishes lichte, with finnes red and scales silver brichte. Of instruments of strenges in accord, heard ye so play a ravishing sweetness, that God, that maker is of all and Lord, na heard never better as he guess. Therewith the wind, unaeth it mich belesse, mad in the leaves grain a noise soft, accordant to the fullest song aloft. Appropriate that the room where Chaucer wakes in that early poem, the Book of the Duchess, was painted with the Romance of the Rose. Methought thus that it was May, and in the dawning he lay, me windwis were a shet dechon, and thurk the glass the sun shone upon me bed with brichte bemis, with many glad a gilde stremis, nen all the welkin was no cloud. So Guillaume de Lorry wakes in the original romance, Jolis, gais et pleins de laisse. So I rose and walked from town to hear the birds sing their rune among the blossoms on the boughs where a cold clear river flows, and in that water filled with light I washed my face. The bed was bright with pebble stones, the meadows green, et l'eau claire et reluisante, la fonce de l'eau de Gravelle. The Pearl poet would pick it up 150 years later in one of the most luminous of all Gothic visions, that supernatural stream down crystal rocks. The dubament of the Derworth Depe, wherein bonkes bane of beryl bricht, swange and sweat the water can swepe, with a runand rood reikend richt, in the funds there stond and stone stepe, as glent through glass that glowed and glicht, as stremand sternes when straw the men slepe, staren in welkin in winter nicht, for uche pobble in pool there pischt, was emerald, sapphire, or the magenta, that all the locha lemet of licht, so there was hit a dubament. Such a wave of lilting Gothic goes out from France, in music as in the other arts. Salisbury, where the quieter early English soars to a peak of virginal geometry. With it, an isorhythmic O Maria, sung by the Della group. It was in the 13th century of Salisbury that the first sparkling poems in what would become the language of Chaucer, mingled sometimes with Latin, took up the pulse of Pointed Arch and Smiling Angel. Those of Lincoln Choir, or this from Westminster Abbey, fresher and more naive than the French, of one that is so fair and bright, velud mare stella, brighter than the day's light, parens et puella. I cry to thee, look thou to me, Lady, pray thy son for me, tam pia, that I may come at last to thee, Maria. The German Gothic road is remote from the hawthorn lanes of English grace. The choir of Cologne took up the Faustian hunger of the heights, to be retraced in time, through Amiens, through Reims, to Notre Dame in Paris. That there were musical parallels, the name of Franco of Cologne attests. Although we read of a three-part work of his performed in Paris, what remains is his treatise, Ars Cantus Mensurabilis, from the second half of the century, when Master Gerard, inspired from this France, was building the Kölner Dome. It codified the notation of the rhythmic modes, so that before 1300 Franconian polyphony had arched its unities of triple conflict over Europe. Like Aquinas' God, questions 28 and 30, a transcendental multitude of real opposition. Where, after Perotin, does Ars Antiqua loom like the French cathedral or the scholastic Summa? Not in most recordings, though such settings of the Mass as this Tournée Kyrie shape the musical future. Only one three-voice Ave Gloriosa Mater, which Coussemaker thought by Franco himself, and for which Tiner lowered the triplum to a choral insistence under his own motetus, catches something of those churches, once more, from Cologne to Paris, and back by interiors, through Reims and Amiens, again to Cologne. So, from the Ile-de-France transplant of this German Cologne, we might have followed the Gothic wave to Italy, where, from the start of the 12th century, here San Zeno, Verona, the Renaissance foreshadowings of Romanesque, had only to receive the flame shapes of Gothic passion to cross the threshold of a new age. Dante's Dolce Stil Nuova, the Ars Nova of music, the sculpture and painting of the time of Giotto. Already that sweeping survey has betrayed the living complex. If Gothic fire had awaited its 13th century height to spread over Europe, we would not have St. Francis Church in Assisi, 1228 and after, much less the saint it was reared to. As Norman Sicily and the empire of the Fredericks witness this 1200 fanciful cloister at Monreale, the northern and pre-Gothic had been working from the first with Byzantine and Moorish to the boot of Italy and beyond. And St. Francis, a crucial link in the Italian awakening which leads through Dante and the Giottesque toward Renaissance, is a testimony as well to the earlier radiation of mystical love from the fervor of France, Troubadour, Abelard, Bernard of Clairvaux. The 12th century awakening which witnessed in France the rise to Gothic, and in England William of Sens, reshaping of Canterbury, stirred Germany as well. Though construction there, as at Bamberg, Mainz, this Maria Lach, retained past 1200 the round arches of Romanesque. So late as 1220, this columned refectory of the Cistercian Kloster Maulbronn stands on that transitional threshold. In German music, too, the new rapture speaks not through the polyphony of Leonin and Perotin, but by the plain-song tradition of solo chant. Thus the melismatic soaring of the hymns of Hildegard von Bingen, contemporary with the buttressing of Notre Dame, as with early organum there. So too with German literature. The Minnesingers carry troubadour devotion into the 13th century. Parsifal and Tristan body forth the chivalric romances of Chrétien, while the Nibelungenlied refines the passions of Dark Age German myths. With eyes of covert longing, that knight and lady too looked upon each other as worth made them do. Mit lieben Augenblicken einander sahen an, der Herr und auch die Frue, das ward viel tugendlich getan. Let this 12th century portal from Navarre lead us back to that radiation from the France of Cluny and Citeaux or Cister, of Chartres and Notre Dame, or in music of Leonin and Perotin. In the perspective of time, the contenders of an age clasp hands. That Cluny, in its wealth, was richly adorning its churches, stirred the ire of Saint Bernard. Though Giselbertus Magi, carved for Cluniac Saint-Lazare in Autun, had epiphanied Bernard's call to Christian love. It was the Romanesque and Cluniac wave which first went out from France, reaching south to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, and north to Kilpec on the borders of Wales. But Bernard had stripped off that Cluniac ornament in his own purifying reform, which seized from the first on the clean vaulting of transitional Gothic. By his death in 1153, his Cistercian order comprised 343 monasteries, a number to be doubled by soon after 1200. Here, the cloister of La Tournai in Provence. How quietly those late 12th century churches spread over Europe, this Fossa Nova south of Rome, suit the mystical soaring of Leonin's organum. Thus the Cistercian refectory of Santa Maria de Poblet in Tarragona, with Tiner's old performance of the Haec Dies for two voices and entirely in the sustained tone style. The lower note, cello here, protracts itself under the increasing tension of the upper, holding to a point of incalculable yearning. So rises or falls to concord, from which passing notes in inwrought sequences of rhythm and tone lead to another peak of the spiritual cry. As in Dante, from spaceless sphere to sphere, by the love that moves the sun and the other stars. L'amor che move il sol e l'altre stelle. Not in the ear, but in some deeper recess, the delayed lingering accumulates, the falls of melody are distilled.